In the middle of the Pentagon, my father, a decorated colonel, roared in front of hundreds of officers. 7 languages? Useless. The army needs warriors, not bookworms. My brother stood beside him, smirking. They had no idea the 4-star general behind them was about to speak one sentence that would make my father collapse into his seat. My name is Captain Sophia Reyes, and when General Carter said those 8 words, everything my family built came crashing down. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, you need to see what happened next. Subscribe right now and tell me where you're watching from, because what happened next will shock you. The air in the Pentagon auditorium was thick enough to slice, heavy with the scent of polished leather and starched uniforms. I sat rigid in my seat, my captain's bars feeling like lead weights on my shoulders. Before me stretched a sea of military power, generals, admirals, and senior officers whose combined service represented centuries of tradition. And there, in the VIP section, stood the source of my lifelong anxiety, Colonel Mateo Reyes, my father, his chest gleaming with medals earned in combat zones from Desert Storm to Afghanistan. Let me be perfectly clear, his voice thundered through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing off the marble walls. This new emphasis on linguistics and cultural sensitivity is creating a weak military. We're training diplomats when we should be training warriors. He gestured dismissively toward the podium where moments earlier they'd been honoring linguistic achievements. 7 languages? What good are 7 languages when you're taking fire in hostile territory? Beside him, my brother, Major Alejandro Reyes, stood at perfect attention, but I could see the subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. This was their classic routine, the roaring lion and his smug cub performing for an audience of their peers. I gripped the edges of my seat, my knuckles turning white. This was supposed to be my moment of recognition, but they turned it into another public humiliation. But then movement caught my eye from the front row. General Jonathan Carter, the 4-star commander of Army intelligence, rose slowly from his seat. The room, already quiet, became absolutely silent. You could hear the rustle of fabric as hundreds of officers turned to watch. Colonel Reyes, General Carter's voice was quiet, but carried with the force of a thunderclap. Your daughter just uncovered a treasonous plot you've been ignoring for months. The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. I watched my father's face transform from confident authority to confused disbelief, then to sheer panic as the general continued. While you were giving speeches about battlefield bravery, General Carter continued, his eyes never leaving my father's, Captain Reyes just used those 7 languages you mock to decode encrypted messages from a foreign intelligence cell operating within your own command structure. The intelligence you called useless just prevented a coordinated attack that would have killed hundreds of your men and compromised our entire Middle Eastern operations. He turned to me, his gaze firm but respectful. Captain Reyes, would you please come to the podium and explain to everyone how your bookworm skills just saved your father's entire division from complete annihilation? As I stood, my legs feeling like jelly, something miraculous happened. An officer in the 3rd row, a hardened-looking colonel with a chest full of combat ribbons, rose to his feet and came to attention. Then another officer stood, and another, until in a wave of respect that swept through the auditorium, every single person was on their feet saluting. Not my father, me. The walk to the podium felt like crossing a canyon. As I passed my brother, I saw his smirk had been replaced by stunned disbelief. My father had actually taken a half-step backward, his hand gripping the chair in front of him for support. The great Colonel Reyes, who had never shown weakness in his life, looked like he had been physically struck. But this moment of vindication was years in the making, born from countless nights of study and sacrifice. The real story began 6 months ago when I'd noticed anomalies in communications coming from my father's command in Kuwait. The patterns were subtle, slight inconsistencies in Arabic dialect usage in supposedly local communications, strange timing in message traffic that didn't match operational patterns, and cultural references in intercepted messages that felt just slightly off. When I first brought my concerns to my immediate supervisor, I was told I was overanalyzing and looking for problems where none existed. Undeterred, I began working late nights, cross-referencing communication patterns with cultural databases I'd built during my doctoral research. The breakthrough came when I realized certain messages contained phrases from specific Syrian dialects that didn't match these supposed origin points. I took my findings to my father, hoping to finally earn his respect. Instead, he laughed in my face. "Sophia," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're reading poetry when you should be reading battlefield reports. Stick to your dictionaries and leave the real intelligence work to combat officers." But I couldn't let it go. The patterns were too clear, the implications too dangerous. So I did something I never thought I would do. I went outside the chain of command. Requesting a private meeting with General Carter, I laid out my evidence. To my surprise and relief, he didn't dismiss my concerns. Instead, he gave me a secure channel and told me to dig deeper. What we uncovered over the next 3 months was terrifying. A foreign intelligence cell had embedded itself into my father's command structure, using his trust in traditional military hierarchy to operate undetected. The ringleader was none other than my father's executive officer, Major Richard Connors, a man who had eaten at our family table, whom my father called his adopted son. Using my language skills, I tracked their communication through 7 different languages and twice as many dialects. I found patterns in Arabic poetry references that concealed meeting locations, identified Russian folk saying that mass weapon shipment details, and decoded Mandarin idioms that hid in cyber attack timelines. While my father was giving speeches about the superiority of traditional military values, his own command was being systematically compromised. The day of the Pentagon ceremony, my father and brother thought they were attending another routine military function. They had no idea that General Carter had arranged the Linguistics Award specifically to force a confrontation. Every word my father spoke in his rant against bookworms and soft skills made his eventual exposure more devastating. Standing at that podium, looking out at the sea of respectful faces, I finally understood that my strength wasn't in being the soldier my father wanted me to be, but in being the intelligence officer I was meant to be. My languages weren't a weakness. They were the superpower that saved countless lives and exposed a security breach that traditional military methods had missed for years. They mocked my love for learning, dismissed my passion for languages, and called me too soft for real soldiering. They never imagined that the very skills they ridiculed would become the weapons that exposed their failures and saved the lives they claimed to protect. If you've ever been told you're not good enough by your own family, if you've ever had your passions mocked by the people who should support you most, I want to hear your story. Share in the comments where you're watching from and tell me about the moment you proved them wrong. If this message about overcoming family judgment and turning your perceived weaknesses into strengths resonates with you, hit subscribe for more stories about finding your power when everyone doubts you.